The dawn does not ask for permission to break the horizon. It simply consumes the night. Yet, within the theater of the human soul, a strange and tragic rebellion persists. Imagine a vast, opulent hall, grander than any cathedral, illuminated by the soft, golden light of possibility. Standing at the center of this hall is a person, draped in tattered, blood-stained garments, grave clothes that smell of damp earth and yesterday's failures. They weep, they offer prayers to the vaulted ceiling, begging for the light to enter, begging for a new beginning, begging for the walls to fall so they might walk into a wider world. But notice the paradox. While their lips move in fervent prayer, their hands are clenched in a white-knuckled grip, clutching the very hem of those tattered, rotting robes. They wish to walk through the doorway of the future, yet they refuse to let go of the corpse of their own history. This is the great, silent suffocation of the human experience. It is a cinematic tragedy playing out in the sanctuary of the subconscious. We are curators of our own museums of misery, polishing the glass cases that hold our past heartbreaks, our old humiliations, and the versions of ourselves we promised we would outgrow. We pray for miracles while tenderly embalming the cadaver of our old identity with the incense of our daily attention. We are witnesses to a bizarre funeral that never ends, where the mourner is also the deceased, and the coffin is the cage. To move forward, one must first recognize the chilling truth. The shadow you are chasing is not your destiny. It is merely the reflection of a version of you that has already been eclipsed. The field cannot be cleared for the harvest until the soil is stripped of the weeds of the previous season. To understand why the soul clings to its own demise, one must descend into the psychological architecture of the ego. Why do we insist on cradling the corpse of our past? The answer lies in the comfort of the known. The human psyche is a creature of habit, and it equates familiarity with safety. Even if that safety is a prison of lack, unworthiness, or chronic struggle, the brain recognizes it as home. Recursive thinking, the anatomy of attachment. Why do we choose the pain we know over the freedom we fear? Because the ego perceives change as a form of annihilation. To become who you truly are, the ego must undergo a process of death, the ego death. This is terrifying to the subconscious, which prioritizes survival over transcendence. It would rather exist in a familiar state of diminished power than risk the vast, unmapped territory of potential. How does this manifest as a spiritual blockage? It manifests as over-identification. We mistake our experiences for our essence. When an individual suffers, they often adopt that suffering as a title. I am the one who was rejected, or I am the one who always struggles with money. By linguistic definition, they are binding their infinite essence to a finite historical event. They are dressing in the energy of a past moment, wearing the tattered robe of one who had to earn love or bow to the god of scarcity. What is the mechanism of this imprisonment? It is the weaponization of memory. We use memory not as a library of lessons, but as a map for the present. Every time we recall a limitation, we reactivate the neural pathways associated with that limitation, effectively reliving the event. We are not merely remembering the past, we are reauthorizing it. The philosophical implication is profound. We are not stuck because we lack faith or drive. We are stuck because our identity is anchored in a gravity field of our own making. We are dressed in the energy of delay, cloaked in a subtle, pervasive shame that we often mistake for humility. But there is nothing humble about denying the sovereign strength of your own spirit. True humility is the acknowledgement that you are a vessel for the divine, and that the vessel must be clean to hold the wine of new life. In the ancient province of Oakhaven, there lived a master stonemason named Elias. Elias was renowned for his ability to carve intricate, lifelike statues out of stubborn granite. One winter, he was commissioned to carve a monument to the Great Awakening, a statue representing a soul finally casting off its shackles. Elias worked for months. He selected the finest, unblemished stone. He chiseled away the excess, the cracks, and the deformities. But as the statue neared completion, a strange obsession took hold of him. He became fixated on the pile of rubble, the discarded stone fragments that lay at his feet. These were the very pieces he had painstakingly chipped away to reveal the masterpiece within. He began to gather the rubble. He brought the jagged, broken, and useless shards into his home. He spent his nights trying to glue the broken pieces back together, whispering to them, trying to reconstruct the old statue he had initially carved before he realized it was flawed. He neglected the finished, magnificent statue of the Great Awakening, leaving it to gather dust in the corner of his workshop. He spent his days in the darkness of his workshop, surrounded by sharp, cold, broken stones, weeping because the new statue felt too daunting, too perfect, too foreign. Aias represents the traveler who finds himself at the precipice of a new life, but cannot bear to leave the debris of his past behind. He mistakes his own discarded history for his identity. He keeps the rubble of his old, broken self, the failures, the rejections, the narrow beliefs, and tries to reassemble them into a life, failing to realize that the masterpiece he was meant to become is already standing, silent and waiting, in the light of the corner he refuses to look into. The moral is as sharp as a chisel. You cannot build the architecture of your future using the rubble of your past. To embody this truth requires a shift from the passive to the proactive. You must stop being a spectator to your own life and become its architect. The integration begins with a realization. You are not a survivor of your past. You are the sovereign of your present. The severance today. Look at the garment you are wearing. Is it the robe of the victim? The cloak of the unworthy? The vestment of the scarcity-minded? Identify the narrative you have been repeating that keeps you tethered to the corpse of who you used to be. Write that story down, not to keep it, but to see it for what it is, a script, a costume, a lie. Then, perform the act of severance. Say aloud, I am not the story I have been telling. Feel the weight of that statement. It is the first sword stroke. When you recognize that your current state is merely a result of where you have been looking, you gain the power to turn your head. You have cleared the first field of weeds, but the soil is still empty. If you leave it barren, the old thoughts will return to claim their territory. You have created a vacuum, and nature, specifically the nature of the mind, abhors a vacuum. It must be filled with a new seed. In our next movement, we shall discover how to identify the silent servant that has been working in your life all along, and how to finally stop giving it the instructions of your poverty and start giving it the commands of your kingdom. But before we descend into the secrets of the subconscious, I ask you to consider, if you were to drop the heavy, rotting story of your suffering right now, what would your hands be free to hold? If this first step of severing the past resonates with your journey, ensure you are subscribed to this channel. We are building a library of liberation, and you are the key reader. Leave a comment below with one old identity you are choosing to bury today. Name it, and you break its power. The stage is set. The old curtains are being drawn back. Are you ready to see what the master artist is waiting to paint? Imagine, if you will, an expansive, infinite landscape of soil rich, dark, and damp, stretching out to the very edges of the cosmos. This is not common earth. It is the primordial substance of existence, the fertile, unformed potential that underlies every breath and heartbeat. In this vast, undulating garden, there stands a silent, unwavering gardener. This gardener has no face, no ego, and no judgment. He does not ask, why do you plant thistles? Nor does he celebrate the bloom of the lily. He possesses neither the capacity for preference nor the ability to discriminate. He is the ultimate servant, possessing a singular, unwavering mandate to manifest. Whatever seed is placed into his calloused hands, he buries deep within the dark, warm earth. He waters it, he tends to it, he nurtures it through the frost and the heat. He does not care if the seed is a poisonous nightshade that will choke the life from the gardener, or a golden wheat that will feed a nation. He is bound by the divine law of obedience. He is your subconscious mind. We walk through our days, often in a state of semi-hypnosis, tossing seeds of doubt, fear, and scarcity into this garden with the recklessness of a gambler, then standing back in horror when the harvest of our anxiety begins to sprout. We scream at the gardener, "Why have you brought me this harvest of pain?" The gardener remains silent, for he knows only the echo of our own commands. He is not a tyrant. He is the most loyal, powerful, and impartial servant in the universe. And he has been waiting for you to realize that you are the master of the estate. To master one's destiny, one must grasp the profound, mechanistic operation of the law of belief. This is not a metaphor. It is the governing architecture of human consciousness. To deconstruct this, we must apply the rigors of recursive inquiry to understand the interaction between the conscious mind, the selector of seeds, and the subconscious, the creator of form. Recursive thinking. The mechanics of obedience. Why does the subconscious mind manifest both our desires and our nightmares with equal efficiency? The answer resides in its neutrality. The subconscious does not possess a moral compass. It operates on the principle of psychological resonance. When a thought is imbued with deep feeling, what we might call the seed, the subconscious accepts this as a command. The why is found in the nature of universal law. The universe is a mirror, and a mirror does not decide what is beautiful or ugly. It simply reflects what is placed before it. How does the subconscious translate a thought into a physical event? It operates through the bridge of the nervous system and the external environment. When you hold a belief such as "I am unworthy," your subconscious it is a feedback loop. You emit a frequency of lack, and the world, responding to your internal state, provides the evidence of that lack. The subconscious creates the reality by filtering your perceptions until you see only what matches your belief. How do we shift the output of such a powerful, autonomous system? The shift occurs at the point of conscious command. We have been operating in a state of accidental creation, letting our past dictate our output. To change the harvest, we must become deliberate commanders. We must recognize that the subconscious is a literalist. It takes every word, every recurring image, and every deeply felt emotion as an absolute, binding instruction from the throne of the conscious mind. The philosophical weight of this is staggering. If the life you currently live is the manifested evidence of your deeply held beliefs, then your current reality is the ultimate diagnostic tool. It is not something to be endured. It is something to be read. Every circumstance in your life is a line of code written by your subconscious, executing the orders you have inadvertently provided. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are the author of a narrative that has been running on autopilot. In the fabled city of Ethelgard, there lived an architect commissioned to build the king's palace. The king gave the architect a blank, infinite canvas and the power to command the very elements to build the structure. However, the king issued one condition. The palace shall be built exactly according to the sketches you provide. I shall not interfere, nor shall I question. But know this. Once a sketch is finalized and handed to the builders, it becomes stone. It cannot be altered. The architect, initially elated, began his work, but he was plagued by a fractured psyche. One moment, he would draw a window overlooking a garden, believing in beauty. The next moment, he would sketch a dark, cramped corridor, whispering to himself, "I am not worthy of the light." He would draw a magnificent throne room. Then, fearing he could not maintain it, he would smudge the ink and draw a barricaded cellar. Years passed. The builders worked tirelessly, their masonry obedient to the architect's hand. When the palace was finally unveiled, it was a grotesque, beautiful, terrifying mess. There were corridors that led to nowhere, windows that looked out onto solid stone, and vast, empty rooms filled with dust. alongside pockets of exquisite, breathtaking majesty. The architect wept, pointing at the palace and crying, "This is not what I wanted." But the builders held up his own scrolls, thousands of them, dated and signed by his own hand. Each smudge, each darkened line, each shaky stroke of fear had been faithfully rendered into marble and granite. The architect had expected the palace to improve itself, or for the builders to intuitively know he didn't mean the dark corridors. He forgot that the builders were not there to interpret his heart, they were there to manifest his lines. Like the architect, we provide the blueprints for our lives through our inner dialogue. We draw the windows of opportunity, and then immediately sketch the bars of limitation. We must stop blaming the builders, the world, the economy, the partners, the luck, and take full responsibility for the lines we are currently drawing. The transition from accidental creator to deliberate master begins with a fundamental act of surveillance. Today, you must become the auditor of your own mental treasury. For the next 24 hours, observe the blueprints you are handing to your subconscious. When you say, "I can't afford that," you are handing a sketch of poverty to your servant. When you think, "They will probably betray me," you are ordering a brick for the wall of your isolation. The audit of the tongue. Stop the momentum. Whenever you catch yourself issuing an order of limitation, a negative decree about your finances, your health, or your worth, pause. Do not just let it pass. Correct it immediately, as if you were an architect crumpling a bad sketch. Replace it with the vision you actually intend to manifest. If you say, "I am struggling," stop. Say, "I am currently navigating a season of growth, and abundance is my constant companion." Feel the difference in the vibration of the words. The subconscious does not argue with the intensity of your conviction. You are beginning to see the mechanism. You have realized that your world is a reflection of your instructions, and that your tongue is the scepter of command. You have moved from the chaos of the rubble to the clarity of the blueprint. But there is a deeper mystery at play. You have learned that the mind is a garden, and you are the gardener. But what happens when the garden is infested with the weeds of generations? What happens when the ground itself seems too hard to break? In our next chapter, we shall walk to the grocery store, not to buy food, but to witness the sacred theater of the mind in action. We will deconstruct why a simple moment of financial anxiety is actually a prayer for scarcity, and how to transform that same moment into a ritual of limitless wealth. This will be the moment you stop trying and start transmuting. Before we depart, pause and reflect. If your subconscious is the most faithful servant you have ever known, what is the one command you have been too afraid to issue? Take a moment to acknowledge that fear. Write it down in the comments and witness its power dissolve as you consciously choose to replace it with a decree of absolute, unshakable success. Secure your place in this transformation. The blueprints are being rewritten, and the palace of your life is finally being built with intention. The gardener is waiting for your next command. What shall you say? The fluorescent lights of the modern marketplace hum with a sterile, electric intensity, casting long, sharp shadows across the linoleum floor. It is a place of mundane utility, yet it serves as the ultimate laboratory for the soul. Observe the woman standing in the checkout queue. The conveyor belt moves with a mechanical, rhythmic persistence, bringing her items nourishment, sustenance, the basic requirements of survival closer to the scanner. As the total price flashes upon the screen, a visible ripple passes through her. It begins in the gut, a sharp, cold knot of contraction, and travels to the shoulders, which tighten in a defensive hunch. She clutches her purse with an intensity that speaks not of commerce, but of survival. In that singular moment, she is not merely purchasing bread or produce. She is performing a high priestess ritual of scarcity. Her anxiety is a prayer, a wordless, visceral declaration to the universe that says, "I exist in a state of lack. I am at the mercy of forces that threaten my security." She views the items as enemies, the bill as a thief, and the transaction as a loss of power. The irony is as thick as the air. She prays for abundance in her private moments, yet in the public arena of her daily life, she broadcasts a frequency of limitation so potent that it effectively cancels out the very prosperity she seeks. She is a paradox walking a soul that desires the harvest of a king while sowing the seeds of a pauper. To understand why we sabotage our own prosperity, we must deconstruct the currency of consciousness. Most people believe that money is the currency of life, a cold medium of exchange managed by banks and markets. This is the great illusion. Money is merely the shadow cast by the true currency, your internal state of being, recursive thinking, the anatomy of scarcity. Why does the subconscious interpret anxiety as a command for more struggle? Because the subconscious does not distinguish between a real threat and a perceived threat. When you feel the sharp pain of financial lack, your nervous system initiates a survival response. The subconscious, ever the literalist, observes this response and concludes, "My master is currently in a state where survival is threatened." To remain faithful to your internal reality, it begins to rearrange the external world to justify that feeling. It creates more evidence of scarcity because, if it didn't, it would be contradicting the state you have so clearly defined as your truth. How does this feedback loop transform the environment? It alters your perception. The individual living in the frequency of not enough becomes blind to opportunities. They walk past open doors because they are too focused on the shadows of the walls. They act with hesitation, making small, fear-based choices that lead to small, limited results. The subconscious works tirelessly to ensure that your outer world remains a perfect reflection of your inner belief. If you believe there is never enough, the universe will ensure that, for you, there never is. How can we reverse this flow of energy? By recognizing that abundance is not something to be acquired, but a current to be entered. Abundance is not a thing, it is an energy of circulation. When you fear loss, you stop the flow. When you bless the exchange, you align with the law of expansion. The philosophical implication is clear. You are not a victim of your bank account. Your bank account is a barometer of your consciousness. To treat money as an enemy is to treat your own life force as an adversary. You are essentially fighting against the flow of the divine, which is inherently abundant, by trying to catch and hold money out of fear. You cannot hold on to that which you are afraid to lose. In the trading hub of Serafina, there were two merchants, Julian and Silas, who occupied stalls of equal size and stature. Both sold fine linens, and both faced the same fluctuating markets. Julian operated from the identity of the striver. Every morning, he arrived at his stall with a grim expression, checking his ledgers with a trembling finger. When customers approached, he saw them not as human beings, but as walking purses. If they walked away without buying, he felt a sting of personal rejection. Whispering, "There is never enough." He hoarded his best linens in the back, terrified they would not be replaced if sold. Over the years, his stall grew dusty, his linens faded, and his spirit became brittle. He believed the world was a harsh, stingy master, and his experience reflected that grim truth. He died a man who had spent his life guarding a dwindling pile of dust. Silas, conversely, operated from the identity of the conduit. He greeted his customers with genuine joy, grateful for the beauty of his wares. When he paid his suppliers, he did so with a sense of celebration, whispering, "I bless this exchange, and I know it returns to me multiplied." He did not fear the depletion of his stock, for he understood that money was energy, and energy must circulate to grow. He gave away samples to those in need, not out of loss, but out of a profound sense of fullness. His stall was always vibrant, his linens always fresh, and his joy was contagious. When the market dipped, he did not panic. He saw it as a temporary shifting of the tides. His wealth was not in the coins he counted, but in the unwavering certainty that the source of his supply was internal. Silas lived a life of constant expansion, proving that the law of the harvest does not discriminate based on the economy. It only responds to the seed planted by the merchant's own soul. To embody this truth, you must consciously shift your posture toward your daily life. This is the integration of abundance, the blessing of the exchange. Choose today to change your ritual. The next time you find yourself in the grocery store, at the gas pump, or paying a bill, notice the physical contraction of your body. When you feel it, pause. Breathe into the feeling. Acknowledge that the feeling of lack is merely a signal, a call to shift your focus. Instead of gripping your purse, open your hand. Say to yourself, or aloud, I bless this money as it goes out, and I give thanks for the value it represents. It is a seed I am planting, and it will return to me pressed down and running over. You are no longer a consumer, you are a channel. By blessing your expenses, you align your energy with the flow of infinite supply. You stop viewing the world through the lens of what I have lost, and start viewing it through the lens of what I am circulating. The bridge. You have learned that your emotions act as the fuel for your manifestations, and that your internal state is the primary currency. You have realized that the grocery store is not a place of consumption, but a place of decree. But there is a deeper, more haunting challenge that remains. We have spoken of the ghost of the past, the memories that keep us anchored. What happens when you look in the mirror, and the reflection is not just a stranger but an accumulation of every wound you have ever suffered, staring back at you with your own tired eyes? In the next chapter, we descend into the midnight hour. We will encounter the ghost in the mirror, the moment when the mask of the identity you have built begins to crack, and you are forced to face the archive of every lie you have ever swallowed. This will be the turning point of your sovereign revolt. Before you go, I ask you to commit. Have you felt the weight of the scarcity contraction in your own life? Identify one area where you have been holding on too tightly. Write it in the comments below, and declare, I am a conduit for abundance, not a container of lack. Like this story, if you are ready to stop counting your deficits and start claiming your inheritance, and subscribe to ensure you don't miss the midnight encounter in the next chapter. The reflection in the mirror is waiting for you. Are you ready to see who is truly looking back? The hour is midnight. The world outside the window has surrendered to the velvet embrace of silence. Yet within the sanctuary of the hallway, a singular, luminous tension remains. A woman stands before an antique mirror, the glass silvered by age, casting back a reflection that seems to ripple with the weight of unseen years. She has come here, as she has done 1,000 times before, seeking the familiar face of a friend. But tonight, the glass betrays her. As she gazes into her own eyes, she does not see the vibrant, sovereign spirit she assumes herself to be. Instead, she sees a composite, a living archive of exhaustion. She sees the weary set of her mother's jaw, the flickering, nervous anxiety of her grandmother, and the hardened lines of a dozen betrayals she had long ago convinced herself she had buried. The reflection is a phantom, a spectral collage of every wound, every limitation, and every false name she has been called. It is a mirror not of her reality, but of her history. This is the paradox of the unexamined life. We look into the mirror expecting to see the present, but we are inevitably haunted by the ghosts of the past. The woman finds herself caught in a chilling recognition. The person in the glass is not the one who breathed the prayer for change. It is the one who has been dutifully enacting the script of the struggle. She realizes, with a tremor that shakes the very foundation of her soul, that she has been trying to decorate a corpse. She has been dressing this ghost in new hopes and fresh dreams, never realizing that the ghost cannot inhabit a future it was never designed to reach. To confront the ghost is to confront the ego's most resilient defensive structure, the archive of wound. We must apply rigorous inquiry to understand why our identity clings so desperately to the very histories that diminish us. Recursive thinking. The architecture of the shadow. Why does the psyche collect and curate memories of hurt? The psyche is an evolutionary survival machine. Its primary directive is to predict the future based on the data of the past to ensure safety. Therefore, the wounds are not merely painful memories. They are stored as warnings. By identifying with the wound, I am the person who was betrayed, the psyche feels it is prepared for the next betrayal. We hold on to the pain because we mistakenly believe that by keeping the memory alive, we are keeping ourselves safe. How does this identification create a self-fulfilling cycle? When we integrate these past experiences into our core identity, we broadcast a specific frequency. We walk into the world expecting the echo of our history. If an individual believes they are the abandoned one, their subconscious scans every interpersonal interaction for evidence of impending departure. They exhibit behaviors hypervigilance, emotional distance, or frantic neediness that inevitably trigger the very abandonment they fear. The ghost in the mirror is not just a passive image. It is the commander of your current behavior. How do we dismantle the archive? We must recognize that the ghost is an accumulation of borrowed energy. The exhaustion, the tension, and the fears were often not ours to begin with. They were inherited, absorbed from our upbringing, and adopted from our social conditioning. We have been playing a part in a play that was written by others. To dismantle the archive, we must withdraw the investment of our attention. We have been feeding the ghost with our constant focus. Starvation is the only cure for a lie. The philosophical implication is profound. You are not your history. You are the observer of your history. By confusing the observer, the true self, with the observed, the archive of wound, you have allowed the servant to take the throne. The ghost in the mirror only possesses the power you granted through your belief that it is, in fact, you. In the remote mountain village of Kalin, there lived a legendary artist named Aris, known for painting portraits that captured not the surface, but the soul. A woman of great wealth and hidden sorrows, Lady Elara, commissioned Aris to paint her likeness. She arrived at his studio, cloaked in heavy, opulent velvets, her face stiff with the pride of a long-standing family tragedy. Aris began the work, but he did not paint her face as it was. He painted the shadows that lingered behind her eyes. He painted the invisible, heavy chains of her ancestors. When he unveiled the portrait, Elara was horrified. "This is not me," she cried. "It is a portrait of a woman laden with shame and fear." "It is the truth of what you wear," Aris replied calmly. "You are not looking at your face. You are looking at the armor you have constructed to protect a heart that is no longer there." For weeks, Elara kept the portrait in her bedchamber. She found herself unable to turn away from it. Every morning, she would look at the painted shadows, and every morning, she would feel them settle upon her own skin. She became the portrait. She began to walk with the same heavy gait as the painted figure. She began to speak with the same guarded tremor. She was literally transforming into the image she had authorized. Finally, in a fit of rage, she took a blade to the canvas. She slashed the throat of the ghost, then the eyes, then the heart of the painted figure. As the canvas tore, she collapsed, weeping not for the loss of a painting, but for the sudden, terrifying absence of the familiar weight she had been carrying. She looked at her hands, and for the first time in years, they were not trembling. She had destroyed the mirror that told her she was a victim. She stood up, stripped away her heavy velvets, and walked into the sunlight of the studio. She was finally dangerously and beautifully herself. The integration of this truth requires a moment of radical, uncomfortable honesty. You must look at the ghost in your own mirror and distinguish between the memory of the past and the sovereign of the present. The declaration of separation tonight: return to your own mirror. Stand before it in the quiet. Do not look for your flaws, and do not look for the you have been told to be. Look into your own eyes and acknowledge the history you see there, the tension, the sadness, the old programming. Now, speak aloud to the reflection. You are a story I have been telling, but you are not the storyteller. You are a memory, but you are not my identity. I release you from the duty of defining me. Feel the visceral release that comes with this separation. You are not killing yourself. You are killing the imposter that has been hiding in your skin. By doing this, you reclaim the light behind the eyes. You are no longer decorating the corpse. You are clearing the stage for the true protagonist to appear. You have learned that the mirror is a tool, not a trap. You have learned that the ghosts of your history are but shadows that feed upon your attention. You have stripped away the heavy velvets of the past and stood in the vulnerability of the present. But what comes next? When the ghost is gone and the mirror is clear, what is the new name you shall carry into the dawn? In our next chapter, we move beyond the clearing of the grave and into the mystery of the resurrection. We shall perform the sacred burial, the violent, holy act of nailing the old identity to the cross so that the new self can rise. This is the most profound movement of our journey. Before we move forward, I ask you to commit. What is the name of the ghost you have finally decided to evict from your sanctuary? Write it down in the comments, and then write, I am the sovereign of my own consciousness. Like this message, if you have felt the shiver of recognition, and subscribe to anchor this breakthrough. The tomb is empty, the stone is rolled away. What are you planning to do with this new, wide-open space in your life? The world is born anew every time the sun crests the horizon. Yet most human beings wake up as archaeologists, immediately beginning a frantic excavation of yesterday's disappointment. Imagine a person waking in the liminal, soft-lit silence of the pre-dawn hours. Before a single foot touches the floor, the mind is already at work, scanning the perimeter of the psyche for the familiar aches of the previous day. It is a ritual of reclamation, reclaiming the worry, reclaiming the resentment, reclaiming the identity of the struggler. This is the great, quiet tragedy of our species. We believe that to be prepared for the day, we must carry the baggage of the night. We fear that if we leave behind the memory of who we were, we will somehow lose the map of who we are. But consider the paradox. You are attempting to fill a cup that is already overflowing with bitter poison. You pray for the new, but you refuse to vacate the old. You are standing at the threshold of a new dawn, but your hands are occupied, firmly gripping the shroud of a yesterday that no longer exists. To enter the kingdom of your own potential, you must pass through a gate of fire. You cannot carry the corpse of your former self into the resurrection of your future. The air in the room is thin, heavy with the weight of unreleased versions of you. It is time to stop being a caretaker of your own cage. It is time to understand that the most loving, the most heroic thing you can do for your soul is to perform a funeral for the lie. Why does the soul recoil from the idea of killing its past identity, even when that identity is the very source of its suffering? We must deconstruct the psychological inertia that keeps us bound to our limitations. Recursive thinking. The anatomy of the ego death. Why do we mistake the release of identity for the loss of existence? The ego is a master of illusion. It convinces us that I am nothing more than my history, my trauma, and my reputation. When we are invited to let go, the ego interprets this as a threat of non-existence. It argues, if I am not the one who struggles, then who am I? We equate the known with safety, and therefore, we interpret the unknown as death. We stay in the prison because we fear the vastness of the field outside. How does the process of crucifixion actually function as an act of creation? In metaphysical law, a vacuum is not empty. It is a point of potential. The crucifixion is not a destructive act. It is a definitive clearing. By speaking the old identity dead, you are withdrawing your consciousness from the past. You are effectively declaring, This version of me no longer has the authority to speak for my future. It is a psychological amputation of the parasitic memories that have been feeding on your life force. Why must this act be violent and definite? Because the human mind is stubborn. Vague intentions are easily ignored by the subconscious. The subconscious responds to the authority of a decree. If you simply hope to change, the old patterns will drift back like weeds. By framing the release as a crucifixion, a definitive, non-negotiable ending, you provide the subconscious with a clear, irreversible command. The philosophical truth is this: you are not being cruel to yourself. You are being a master of your own domain. The false self is a tenant who has long overstayed their welcome, refusing to pay rent while destroying the premises. An eviction must be formal. It must be final. It must be spoken with the voice of one who knows that the building belongs to the light. In the ancient city of Oros, there lived a weaver named Kale, known for his intricate tapestries that depicted the history of the realm. Kale had spent his life weaving the same story, a story of a kingdom in decline, of a people who were perpetually hungry, and of a hero who was destined to fail. His fingers moved with a rhythmic, hypnotic familiarity, pulling the gray, coarse thread of despair through the loom. Every morning, Kyle would look at his tapestry and sigh, "This is the reality of our people." And every night, he would weave more gray into the fabric. He was a prisoner of his own loom. He felt the weight of every failure he had ever woven into the tapestry, believing that it was his duty to preserve the truth of the kingdom's sorrow. One night, an old traveler entered his shop. Seeing the tapestry, the traveler asked, "Why do you weave a story that makes you weep?" "Because it is the truth of what has been," Kale replied. "But you are the weaver," the traveler said. "You have been given the loom, the thread, and the light. Why do you choose to finish the pattern you were given, rather than start a new one?" The traveler took a pair of shears from his belt and handed them to Kale. "The only way to weave the golden thread of the future is to cut the gray thread of the past. If you do not sever the strand, the entire fabric will remain caught in the old pattern." Kale hesitated, his hands trembling. The gray thread was his comfort. It was the story he knew by heart, but he thought of the people, the hunger, the decline, the endless, repeating cycle. With a sudden, sharp intake of breath, he pressed the blades together and severed the thread. The tension in the loom vanished. The fabric hung limp, waiting. With a shaking hand, he reached for a spool of gold he had kept hidden under his bench for years. A color he had deemed too bright, too daring, too unrealistic for the kingdom of his past. He began to weave. He did not ask permission. He did not seek approval. He simply began a new design, and as he worked, the shop filled with a light that had never been there before. The gray was not destroyed. It was simply left behind, a closed chapter in the masterpiece he was now authorized to create. The integration of this truth requires that you treat your consciousness with the reverence of a sovereign. The burial is a ritual, not a suggestion. It is the necessary prerequisite for the resurrection that follows. The morning crucifixion. Tomorrow morning, before the world demands anything of you, stay in the quiet. Do not check your device. Do not seek the distraction of the external. Sit at the edge of your bed, and with the authority of one who is the master of their own house, speak aloud. Identify the identity you are burying: the worrier, the victim, the unworthy one. Say, "I now bring the identity to the altar." You have served your purpose in the lesson, but you have no place in the kingdom. I nail your limitation to the cross of truth. I speak your death. You are finished. You are gone. I leave you in the silence of the past, for you are not who I am. Take a deep breath and feel the finality. Do not apologize. Do not look back to see if it is still there. Walk away from that version of yourself with the certainty of a soul who knows they are moving toward a greater light. You have created the void. You have emptied the vessel. You have severed the thread. You have conducted the burial. The stage of your consciousness is now swept clean, and the air is filled with the electric anticipation of the new. But a void is a dangerous place if left empty. You cannot simply not be the old. You must be the new. In our next chapter, we descend into the divine enthronement. We shall learn how to take this sacred, empty space you have created and fill it with the thunderous, undeniable presence of your true self. We will move from the death of the lie to the resurrection of the Christ consciousness within you. This is the moment where the power moves from the lips to the life. Before we continue, I ask you to commit. Are you willing to perform this severance? Are you ready to stop being the curator of your own grave? Leave a comment below with the simple, powerful decree: the old is dead. I am ready to rise. Like this message if you have felt the weight of the past lift, and subscribe to maintain the momentum of your resurrection. The tomb is empty. The morning is here. Who are you going to become when the light hits your face? The tomb is empty. The heavy, cold stone that once sealed the consciousness of the past has been rolled away, revealing not a void, but a radiant, shimmering expanse of pure potential. Imagine standing in the very center of that silence, that holy, cleared-out space where the old identity once clung to the shadows. The air itself feels different. It is charged with the static of an impending lightning strike. You are the empty vessel, cleansed by the fire of your own decree. Yet, here lies the great, overlooked test of the seeker. To remain in the void is to risk being pulled back into the gravity of the familiar. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the psyche, left unattended, will instinctively rush to refill the space with the discarded rubble of old habits. The paradox is this: you have successfully died to the lie, but unless you rise into the truth, you remain a ghost haunting your own house. You have performed the burial. Now, you must perform the enthronement. This is the moment the crown of your divinity is returned to its rightful place. It is not a request, it is an appointment with the Absolute. The Spirit of the Most High, that great, silent, and hovering power, does not wait for you to be ready or good enough. It waits for you to occupy the throne. To ascend into the truth of the divine self is to engage in a psychological metamorphosis of the highest order. We must deconstruct why the act of enthronement is the fundamental mechanism of spiritual manifestation. Recursive thinking, the mechanics of the Christ identity. Why is the identification with the true self or Christ consciousness often met with intense internal resistance? Because the ego, which thrives on separation and limitation, views your divinity as its ultimate executioner. When you step onto the throne of your own consciousness, the ego loses its ability to dictate the terms of your reality through fear. The resistance you feel, the whisper of "who are you to claim this?" is not the voice of humility. It is the final, desperate plea of an ego that knows it is about to be demoted from master to servant. How does speaking the resurrection actually rewrite the architecture of the brain? Through the process of neuro-linguistic programming. When you declare, "I am," with total internal alignment, you are firing new neural circuits. You are moving from the reactive brain, which processes the world through the lens of survival, to the creative brain, which processes the world through the lens of manifestation. You are not faking it. You are installing a new operating system. The subconscious, recognizing the absolute authority in your tone, begins to shift the physical environment to confirm this new, unshakable declaration. How does the principle of enthronement distinguish between wishing and commanding? A wish is a state of lack. It implies you do not currently possess the thing you desire. A command, however, is a state of being. To enthrone your true self is to operate from the position of the finished work. You are not becoming the powerful being. You are recognizing that you are the powerful being, and your daily actions are simply the outward expressions of that established truth. The philosophical implication is this: you are not a pilgrim walking toward God. You are a spark of the infinite experiencing the density of the physical. Your work is not one of attainment, but of remembering. The throne has always been there, and it has always been yours. You simply stopped sitting on it because you were too busy apologizing for your own light. In the sprawling, golden kingdom of Athelgard, there lived a young man who had been raised in a humble, ramshackle cottage on the edge of the woods. He had no memory of a palace. He believed his life was defined by the labor of the soil and the scarcity of the season. He was known throughout the village as the exile, for he carried himself with a quiet, lingering sadness, as if he were constantly waiting for a home he had never known. One day, an old royal decree was discovered in the village archives. It spoke of a lost prince, the rightful heir to the throne of Athelgard, who had been spirited away during a time of chaos and left in the care of a peasant. As the young man read the scroll, a surge of dormant electricity rushed through his veins. He looked at his hands. They were the hands of a laborer, but as he stared, he saw them as the hands of a king. The village elders laughed at him. "You are the son of a peasant," they jeered. "Look at your rags. Look at your tools." But the man did not argue. He did not plead. He walked into his tiny cottage, took off his tattered tunic, and washed his face. He stood in the center of his small room, and though it was made of mud and straw, he looked around and spoke with the voice of the royal house. "I am the Prince of Athelgard," he declared. The room did not change. The walls did not become marble. The floor remained dirt. But the man did not care. He began to walk with the posture of a monarch. He spoke with the authority of one who had been trained for centuries to rule. He did not wait for the palace to come to him. He moved as if he were already there. Within days, the local governors, unsettled by his sudden, commanding presence, began to treat him with a reverence they had never shown the exile. Within weeks, emissaries from the true capital arrived, guided by rumors of a man who carried himself like a king. By the time he reached the palace gates, he was not a stranger asking for a throne. He was a king returning to his seat. He had not become a prince. He had simply stopped believing the lie of the cottage. The integration of this truth requires that you cease all attempts at becoming and start practicing the art of being. Your true self is not a future version of you. It is the eternal reality currently being obscured by your self-doubt. The morning enthronement. Stand before your mirror. This is your altar. Look into your own eyes, and do not look away until you see the light, the unshakable, eternal spark that was never born and cannot die. This is the Christ consciousness within you. Speak to this self. Call it forth. Let your voice carry the thunder of absolute, non-negotiable certainty. Declare, "I am the resurrection and the life of my divine plan. I am not becoming. I am. I do not earn, I inherit. The tomb is empty, and I have risen into the full authority of my sovereign self. My word is a scepter. I point it at my life and command it into divine order." Do not just say these words, breathe into them. Feel the vibration of them in your chest. When you walk away from the mirror, you are not the same person who stepped toward it. You are the monarch returning to the throne. Act throughout your day as if you have already been coronated. You are the architect of the new heaven and the new earth. The throne is occupied. The declaration is made. You have moved from the death of the past to the life of the present. But now, you must learn to govern. The world will test your claim. The old patterns will try to convince you that you are still the peasant in the cottage. How do you handle the turbulence of daily life when your old identity fights for the crown? In our next chapter, we enter the embodied walk. We will learn how to translate your morning decrees into the doing of your afternoon. We will explore how the resurrected self responds to challenges, to condescension, and to the inevitable waves of life, proving that the kingdom is not a destination, it is a way of walking. Before we depart, commit to the coronation. Write in the comments, "I am the sovereign of my own consciousness." Like this message if you have felt the shift in your posture, and subscribe to ensure you remain seated on the throne. The world is watching to see how a king walks. What will they see when they look at you today? The transition from the sanctuary of the altar to the theater of the mundane is the most treacherous crossing of the soul's journey. Imagine the individual who, having spent the morning in deep communion with their divine self, steps out into the blinding, chaotic light of the afternoon. The morning silence, once saturated with the thunder of holy decrees, is suddenly assaulted by the sharp, serrated edges of reality. An email filled with condescension, the sudden sting of a rejected proposal, or the familiar, gnawing ache of loneliness in a crowded room. Here lies the paradox. It is easy to be enlightened on the mountaintop, but it is a distinct, agonizing art to be enlightened in the grocery store. The world does not offer a red carpet for your newfound sovereignty. Instead, it offers a series of trials designed to measure the depth of your conviction. As the day unfolds, the old identity, the one you buried, the one you crucified, begins to stir in the dirt, whispering, "See, nothing has changed. You are still the small, unloved, and struggling thing you always were." It is a cinematic moment of friction. The atmosphere is thick with the scent of doubt, and the pressure to retreat into the comfortable armor of your former self is almost magnetic. You are the sovereign. But are you the sovereign when the castle is under siege? To master the embodied walk is to realize that faith is not a feeling, it is an exercise of identity in the face of contradictory evidence. We must deconstruct the mechanics of this integration using the rigors of recursive logic. Recursive thinking, the bridge between belief and behavior. Why does the external world consistently test our new identity immediately after we claim it? This is the law of consistency. The universe is not trying to break you. It is verifying your commitment. Think of it as a mirror reflecting back to you the strength of your own signal. If your signal, the belief in your sovereignty, is weak, the mirror reflects the obstacle as truth. If your signal is absolute, the obstacle becomes an opportunity for demonstration. The test is simply the universe requiring you to match your physical reality to the spiritual standard you have set. How does responsibility, the ability to choose your response, fundamentally alter the trajectory of the law? Most people react. They feel the stimulus and immediately return with the habitual behavior of the old self. By pausing, you break the loop. When you respond instead of reacting, you are exercising responsibility. You are choosing to act from the resurrected self. This creates a new neural path. Every time you choose to respond with calm authority rather than defensive anger, you are effectively paving the new reality. You are proving to your subconscious that the old way of operating is now obsolete. How do we maintain the king's posture in the midst of daily trivialities? By understanding that nothing is trivial. Every interaction, a polite decline of a disrespectful request, the way you sit in a meeting, the way you speak to yourself when you fail, is a piece of the architecture of your life. The sovereign does not need to win every argument. The sovereign simply needs to be. The philosophical weight is undeniable. The embodied walk is where faith becomes flesh. If your belief does not change your behavior, then it is not belief, it is mere sentiment. You are not doing to get results, you are being because you have already attained the result in the realm of consciousness. In the high-stakes court of a distant empire, there served a diplomat named Soren. Soren was once a man of sharp, volatile reactions. He took every slight as an act of war, and every failure as a personal stain. His life was a whirlwind of unnecessary conflicts and burned bridges. He was the classic victim of his own circumstances, always defending a reputation that was constantly crumbling. Then came a season of profound change for Soren. He began to apply the discipline of the resurrected self. He spent his mornings in silent, ironclad commitment to his own wholeness. But the court remained the same. His rivals, noticing his newfound stillness, pushed harder. They insulted his lineage, challenged his proposals, and whispered lies behind his back. One evening, At a banquet, a rival spilled wine upon Soren's robes and laughed, waiting for the familiar, explosive rage. The hall went silent, expecting the usual scene of chaotic pride. Soren did not explode. He did not tighten his jaw or sharpen his gaze. He simply stood, looked at the rival with a calm, penetrating pity, and gestured to a servant to wipe the table. He said, with a quiet, devastatingly clear voice, "My friend, your frustration seems to be quite heavy today. I hope you find the peace you are looking for." He turned back to his conversation, ignoring the rival entirely. The room was paralyzed. The rival, deprived of the fight he had expected, looked small, petty, and foolish. Soren had not defended himself. He had transcended the need to. He didn't need to win the fight because he knew he was not a participant in the rival's reality. He had achieved the embodied walk. He was the king in a room full of children, and his behavior was the only authority that mattered. The integration of this truth requires that you live your day as if you are the most powerful entity in the room. Not because of ego, but because of the truth you have claimed. The sovereignty check. Throughout your day, set a rhythmic alarm, a sovereignty check. When it goes off, stop and ask the question, how would the resurrected self respond to this moment? If you are facing a difficult colleague, do not respond with the old, wounded, defensive self. Respond with the calm, immovable authority of the one who knows their worth is not up for negotiation. If you are experiencing a moment of loneliness, do not respond with the abandoned one's neediness. Respond with the self-sufficiency of the one who is whole, even in the silence. Every time you choose to act from the new identity, you are cementing your reign. You are proving that the tomb is indeed empty. You are walking your talk, and the universe, which only knows how to mirror your state, must begin to pave a new path before you, cleared of the ghosts of your past. You have learned to walk as the sovereign, even when the wind blows and the shadows gather. You are the calm in the center of the storm. But what happens when the storm grows in intensity? We have discussed the test of the daily walk, but there is a deeper turbulence that occurs when you flip the master switch of your consciousness. When you declare, "I am the sovereign," the old identity will not simply fade away. It will roar in a final, desperate attempt to survive. In our next chapter, we will confront the storm of transition. We will look at why feeling worse or experiencing sudden disorientation is actually the glorious, undeniable signal that your new reality is taking root. We will prepare your nerves for the shaking of the soil and learn how to recognize the death rattle of the ego before it convinces you to retreat back to the desert. Before we move into the eye of the storm, I ask you, where have you been reacting when you should have been reigning? Identify one situation where you have allowed an external stimulus to define you, and write in the comments, "I am the commander, not the casualty." Like this message if you are ready to master the embodied walk, and subscribe to ensure you stand firm during the coming shaking. The throne is occupied, and the king does not run. Are you ready to see what happens when the storm hits the rock? There is a profound, albeit often terrifying, quiet that precedes the transformation of a caterpillar into a butterfly. It is not a graceful, gilded transition. It is a violent liquefaction. The old form must be dissolved entirely, turned into a genetic soup before the new can emerge. Humans, however, expect the spiritual path to be a steady, upward climb, a gilded staircase leading directly into the clouds. Instead, what one often encounters upon deciding to fully embody their sovereign self is a sudden, disorienting collapse of the familiar. Imagine standing on a cliffside as the sun begins to set. You have committed to the new path. You have made your declarations, and you have stood upon the altar of your own truth. Suddenly, the sky turns a bruised, unnatural violet. The air pressure drops until your ears ache, and the wind begins to howl with a predatory hunger. The world as you know, it starts to shake, the bank account dips, the long-term relationship frays at the seams, the nagging anxieties you thought you had buried begin to shriek from the shadows. It feels as though your life is falling apart. It feels as though your spiritual work has backfired, inviting chaos instead of blessing. But here is the paradox of the seeker. The storm is not a sign that you have failed. It is the definitive, undeniable evidence that you have succeeded. The resistance you feel is not the universe saying no. It is the old world saying goodbye. To remain unmoored in the heart of the storm, one must understand the psychological physics of upheaval. We must deconstruct the shaking of the soil through the rigors of recursive inquiry. Recursive thinking. The ego's last stand. Why does the life we are trying to leave behind fight so viciously for its survival? The ego is not merely a thought process. It is a complex network of stored identities and survival instincts. When you flip the master switch of your consciousness from limitation to abundance, you are essentially initiating a system override. The old root systems of fear, lack, and unworthiness have been feeding on your attention for decades. They are, in a very real sense, living entities within your psyche. When you threaten their existence, they react with the intensity of a drowning creature. The panic, the sudden waves of doubt, and the influx of unfortunate events are the ego's final, desperate attempt to reclaim its throne. How does the law of germination explain the lag between our internal shift and our external reality? The subconscious mind is like a garden bed that has been compacted by years of heavy, stagnant traffic. When you begin to till that soil with new, high-frequency declarations, you are physically disrupting the crust of the earth. For a time, the garden will look less like a sanctuary and more like a battlefield. The roots of the old weeds are being pulled up, and the soil is raw and exposed. This period of in-between is where most seekers lose their nerve. They look at the messy, upended garden and think, "I have ruined it." They do not realize that the seed of their new reality is buried in the dark, and the shaking is merely the force of new life, fighting to reach the surface. How do we navigate the disorientation of sudden light? By acknowledging that the disorientation is a symptom of expansion. You have been living in a dark room for a lifetime. When the door is suddenly kicked open, the light is blinding. It illuminates all the dust, all the rot, and all the dark corners you had grown accustomed to. Do not mistake the illumination for an increase in darkness. You are simply seeing, for the first time, what has been there all along. The philosophical implication is absolute. The storm is the threshold. If you turn back now, you return to a tomb that has already been hollowed out by your own consciousness. You cannot go back to being who you were, because that person no longer exists. You have burned the bridge, and the only way out is through the eye of the storm. In the high peaks of the northern range, there lived a master alpinist named Kalin, who taught his students how to weather the sudden, violent blizzards of the summits. He told them of the anchor principle. When a blizzard hits the mountain, the wind is so ferocious it can peel a man from the rock face. Most novices, in their terror, try to move faster, trying to descend or find a hidden cave. They panic, they lose their footing, and they fall. But the master knows the secret. When the storm is at its height, you do not move. You drive your pick deep into the stone, you tether yourself to the immovable mountain, and you become the rock. You do not fight the wind. You let it howl. You let it blast you. You let it strip away everything that is not secured to the mountain. One day, a student named Alara was caught in a massive gale. She felt the fear rising, the ego whispering that she would surely perish. She thought of her warm, safe home in the valley and the easy, predictable life she had traded for this ascent. The wind shrieked, "You are a fool. Go back to the safety of your smallness." She had her hand on the release of her safety line, ready to drop down and run. But she remembered Kalin's words. The storm is not trying to kill you. It is testing the strength of your tether. Alara gripped her anchor. She stopped trying to control the wind and focused entirely on the strength of her grip. She stayed there for hours, enduring the battering, her heart racing against the cold. When the clouds finally broke, the air was crystalline, the view was infinite, and she found that the storm had blown away all the loose, dangerous debris that had been clinging to her pack. She was lighter, she was stronger, and she was exactly where she needed to be. The storm had not failed her. It had refined her. The integration of this truth requires that you cease to be a victim of your circumstances and become the observer of your own refinement. When the storm hits, do not shrink. Anchor. Anchor decree. When the turbulence arises, when your emotions spike, when your finances show a temporary dip, when the old doubts scream the loudest, take a physical action. Place your hand on your heart or your feet firmly on the ground. Breathe into the center of your being. This is your anchor. Do not attempt to analyze the storm. Do not try to solve the external problem from the internal state of panic. Simply state, this is not a collapse. This is a clearing. I am the observer of this turbulence, and I remain unmoved. The roots of the old are being pulled up to make way for the harvest of the new. I trust the timing of the law. By refusing to engage with the chaos, you starve it of the one thing it needs to survive, your reaction. You are the rock. Let the wind howl. It cannot move a sovereign who has already decided where they stand. You have learned to stand your ground when the world around you is in flux. You have recognized the shaking of the soil for what it truly is, the precursor to your new harvest. But as you emerge from the storm, you may feel a strange, lingering sense of homesickness, not for the life you left, but for the illusion of who you were. You are beginning to suspect that you were never broken at all. You are starting to remember something far more ancient than your own history. In our next chapter, we enter the law of divine remembrance. We will explore why the soul's journey is not one of improvement, but of recollection. We will dismantle the final, most pervasive lie of the human condition. The idea that you are a human being struggling to become divine, rather than a divine being who simply forgot the majesty of your own name. Before we walk into the clarity of the summit, I ask you, what is the most intense storm you are currently facing in your life? Do not describe the chaos. Describe the anchor you are choosing to use. Write it in the comments. I am the rock in the center of the storm. Like this message, if you have finally stopped running from the gale and subscribed to anchor your place on this mountain. The view from the top is approaching, and you have come too far to turn back now. Are you ready to see what the storm was hiding? Imagine, if you will, a magnificent, golden eagle born into a coop of common hens. For years, the eagle has lived as a chicken, pecking at the dirt, scratching for worms, and cowering at the shadow of any hawk that crosses the sky. The eagle does not know it is an eagle. It has no concept of the wind's thermal currents, the majesty of the mountain peaks, or the sharpness of its own talons. It is a creature of the earth, limited by the wire mesh of its enclosure and the collective, anxious clucking of its peers. Yet, there is a deep, resonant ache within its breast, a longing that defies the safety of the coop. It watches the clouds and feels a strange, inexplicable recognition of a home it has never known. This is the condition of the human soul. We believe we are broken beings, needing to be mended, perfected, and improved into something better. We treat our divinity as a distant prize to be earned through asceticism, discipline, and suffering. But consider the paradox. The eagle does not need to learn how to be an eagle. It does not need to take flight lessons or read manuals on how to soar. It only needs to remember what it already is. The wire mesh of the coop is not a wall. It is a suggestion. The tragedy is that we are not trying to reach heaven. We are merely trying to wake up from the dream that we were ever cast out of it. The journey of the soul is not an odyssey of becoming. It is a mission of remembrance. we must deconstruct the false architecture of self-improvement through the rigors of recursive inquiry. Recursive thinking, the illusion of repair. Why does the culture of self-improvement actually perpetuate our feelings of inadequacy? Because it is built on the foundational lie that you are currently insufficient. When you set out to fix yourself, you are affirming the very premise that you are broken. You are feeding the ego's narrative that your worth is a variable, dependent on your performance or your purity. The why is simple. The ego loves the project of self-improvement because it ensures the ego stays in charge of the soul. As long as you are working on yourself, you are distracted from the truth that the self is already whole. How does the realization of wholeness change the act of manifestation? If you believe you are a broken vessel attempting to earn a miracle, you will always be in a state of striving, which is a state of lack. If you recognize you are a whole, divine being experiencing a temporary amnesia, you stop manifesting and start revealing. You are not moving toward a goal. You are simply peeling back the layers of misidentification. The divine energy does not need to be summoned. It needs to be unblocked. How do we bridge the gap between our current limitations and our eternal nature? By the act of divine recognition. You do not get power. You acknowledge the power that is already animating your very cells. When you say, "I am becoming powerful," you are lying to the truth of your nature. When you say, "I am the power of the divine manifesting through me," you are aligning your speech with the architecture of your soul. The philosophical implication is liberating. You are not a human being striving for divinity. You are a divine being navigating the density of human experience. The I am within you, the Christ consciousness, the spark of God, has never been touched by your failure, your history, or your shame. It is the silent, unshakable foundation upon which the entire movie of your life is being projected. In a kingdom far beyond the mapping of mortal men, a great king went out into the forest to hunt. He was separated from his guard, fell into a deep ravine, and struck his head upon the stone. When he awoke, the memory of his throne, his crown, and his kingdom had been wiped clean from his mind. He wandered into a nearby village, ragged and delirious. The villagers, seeing his state, gave him a broom and told him to sweep the stables. For 20 years, the king lived as a stable boy. He endured the cold, the hunger, and the mockery of those who thought him slow-witted. He often wept at night, gazing at the moon, feeling a profound, inexplicable sense of grief, though he could not name what he had lost. He became convinced that he was born to serve, and he spent his days trying to learn how to be a better stable boy. He read books on sweeping. He studied the techniques of mucking stalls. He was deeply committed to his self-improvement as a servant. One day, a royal procession passed through the village. The king's own father, the emperor, looked down from his carriage and recognized his son's eyes. He commanded the carriage to stop and walked directly to the stable boy. He did not ask, "Are you a good worker?" or "Have you improved your sweeping technique?" He simply looked the boy in the face and whispered a single word, "Sovereign." In that second, the trauma was shattered. The memory of the throne returned like a lightning strike. The stable boy didn't have to learn how to be a king. He didn't have to study. He didn't have to practice. He simply stood up, dropped the broom, and looked at his father with eyes that held the history of an empire. He was a king. He had always been a king, and he would always be a king. The broom was never his nature. It was merely a prop in the dream he had been living. The integration of this truth requires that you stop judging your life by the broom you are currently holding. You are not the job you perform, the bank account you maintain, or the failures you have accrued. The remembrance ritual. Choose a time, today, perhaps while looking in the mirror, or while sitting in silence to perform the remembrance. Stop evaluating yourself. Stop looking for what needs to be fixed. Instead, look for what is already present. Recognize that the very awareness with which you are reading these words is the spark of the divine. Say aloud, I am not the story I have been living. I am the eternal observer. I am the source of the life that animates this form. I stop the search, for I have arrived. Feel the relief in that statement. You are not doing anything today. You are simply allowing your true nature to breathe. You are not a human in progress. You are a masterpiece in disguise. By acknowledging your wholeness, you begin to act from a place of radical, unshakable stability. You have learned that the search for divinity is an illusion, for the divine is the seeker itself. You have dropped the broom and remembered the throne. But there remains a final, glorious task. We have dismantled the past, mastered the present, and reclaimed our name. Now, we must move into the final sovereign's decree. We are preparing to issue the final command that will set the course of your life for the years to come. In our final chapter, we shall synthesize all we have learned into a singular, lightning strike ceremony of activation. We will speak the I am as it was meant to be spoken, not as an affirmation, but as a law. We will seal this work with a public, sacred contract, turning your word into the reality that the universe must inevitably obey. Before we conclude this remembrance, I ask you, what is the broom you are still clutching, pretending it defines your worth? Write it in the comments. And then write, I am the king, queen, and I drop the broom. Like this message, if you have finally seen through the disguise of your own life, and subscribe to anchor this remembrance. The procession is waiting at the village gate. Are you ready to stop sweeping and start ruling? The threshold is reached. Beneath the vaulted architecture of your own consciousness, you stand at the apex of the journey. The air here is not the thin, desperate oxygen of the valley, but the rarefied, charged atmosphere of the summit. Look upon the landscape of your life one last time, not as a victim surveying a battlefield, but as a ruler viewing a province. The paradox that has governed your existence until this moment is finally resolved. For as long as you believed you were the effect of your circumstances, you were at the mercy of the world. But the moment you remember you are the cause, the world begins to tremble and reform at the mercy of your word. Imagine a gavel, fashioned not of wood, but of solidified light, resting in your palm. It is the weight of your own authority. You have spent years pleading with the universe, whispering prayers of please, if only, and I hope. The universe, in its perfect, impartial obedience, has mirrored your posture of supplication. But today, the tone of the cosmos shifts. You do not ask for the walls of your prison to fall. You command them. The sound that echoes through the halls of eternity is not a prayer, it is a decree. You are no longer the one who waits. You are the one who initiates. The universe is a vast, resonant chamber, and it is waiting, with bated breath, for the sound of your true name. To issue a sovereign's decree is to utilize the master key of reality, the understanding that your word is the bridge between the invisible realm of potential and the visible realm of form. Recursive thinking. The mechanics of the unstoppable decree. Why does the act of speaking create a physical ripple in the fabric of existence? In the deep mechanics of metaphysics, sound is vibration, and vibration is the substrate of all matter. When you speak a decree, you are not merely moving air. You are aligning the subatomic particles of your reality with a new frequency. The why is found in the correspondence of the inner and outer. As above, so below, as within, so without. When the inner state, your consciousness, is in total, harmonic alignment with the command, your word, the outer world has no choice but to conform. It is a scientific certainty of the soul. How does a decree differ from a simple affirmation? An affirmation is a hopeful statement intended to soothe the ego. A decree is an exercise of dominion. A decree is spoken from the position of the finished work, the I am. It does not contain the word want or need, for those words imply lack. It is a present tense command that treats the future as already established. The decree is the end of negotiation. When the king issues a decree, he does not ask the tax collector if he agrees. He sets the law. You are the king of your consciousness. How do we sustain the decree when the physical evidence has not yet arrived? By maintaining the frequency of the outcome. The decree is a law of nature. Just as gravity does not consult you before it pulls an object to the earth, your word does not consult your current bank account or your current physical circumstances before it begins to move the energy of your life. The manifestation is a lagging indicator. Your job is not to watch the clock, but to hold the position of the sovereign. The philosophical implication is final. You are the cause of your own liberation. You have been pointing the power of your consciousness at the wrong targets for a lifetime. Now, you pivot. You point it at the destiny you have chosen. In the annals of the ancient city of Oros, there was a legend of an architect who was tasked with building a sanctuary that would house the sun itself at high noon. The council of elders laughed, for they believed the sun was a distant, unreachable god, and no building could ever contain its fire. They mocked the architect, telling him to build a stable for goats instead. The architect did not engage in the debate. He did not try to convince them of his vision. He simply went to the highest plateau and began to draw, not with ink on paper, but with his voice. He stood at the center of the site, and, for 7 days, he spoke. He described the height of the walls, the clarity of the crystal roof, the refraction of the light, the silence of the altar. Every word was a blueprint. Every command was a layer of stone. The elders brought him bread and water, but he ignored it. He was busy constructing a reality. On the 7th day, he stepped back and said, "It is finished." The next morning, as the sun climbed to its zenith, the light struck the plateau and, as if guided by an invisible hand, it curved, it solidified, and it filled the space he had spoken into being. The sanctuary appeared, glowing with a brilliance that blinded the scoffers. He had not built it with hammers and nails. He had built it with the unwavering architectural power of his decree. He knew that the physical world is merely the hardening of the thought, and the thought is commanded by the word. The integration of this truth is found in the finality of your own signature. You must now seal the work. This is the moment where you translate the 90-minute manuscript of your transformation into the living, breathing reality of your tomorrow. The activation: stand tall. Feel the weight of the gavel in your hand. This is your final act as the initiate and your first act as the sovereign. Speak these words, not as a request, but as the final word on your life. I die to the illusion of my limitation. I rise in the truth of my divinity. I do not ask for my life. I command it. I speak to the mountain of my past, and I say, be removed. I speak to the seed of my future, and I say, be manifest. My word is a scepter, and I point it at my world. My life is the temple of the Most High, and from this moment forward, only miracles are permitted to enter. Pause in the silence. Let the sound settle into the bones of the earth. You have finalized the contract. The manuscript is closed, but the story is only beginning. You have walked the path from the grave to the throne, from the ghost to the sovereign. You are now the commander of your own existence. The transition is complete. The old self is not merely dead, it is forgotten. You are the new creation, and the world is waiting to see what you will build with the power of your name. As a final seal, anchor this transition in the physical realm. Write in the comments below, with the full, unwavering power of your soul, I am the sovereign, and I command my world. This is your public declaration, your final act of burial, and your first act of reign. You are no longer waiting for a sign from the heavens. The heavens have spoken through you. Go forth, command your reality, and watch the world bend to the majesty of your word. The sanctuary is built. Step inside. Your throne is ready.